Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Bystander Intervention Training. My name is Courtney Mangus, and I am the Programs Manager at the Council on American-Islamic Relations in the San Francisco Bay Area office. Thank you all for joining. I want to first give credit to the Montgomery County Civil Rights Coalition for creating the original Bystander Intervention Training content, which we learned and then have been using for over probably 4 years now. And at some point we revised it based on our experiences. And yeah, so we're just going to dive in. So first I want to hear from all of you. How many of you are familiar with CAIR? So you can let me know by just raising your hand if you're on camera, or you can just put a +1 in the comment section if you've heard of CAIR before. So for those of you that are less familiar with CAIR, or maybe this is your first time hearing about CAIR, it stands for the Council on American-Islamic Relations, and we are in the San Francisco Bay Area, so that's the area that we service, obviously. Our office is located in Santa Clara. We are a nonprofit grassroots civil rights and advocacy group. We are actually the largest Muslim civil liberties group in the nation, with over 30 offices nationwide. And our office is actually the oldest office, second only to the national office. And we've been doing this work since 1994. The core of our work is that we provide free, confidential, and culturally competent legal assistance to people who are discriminated against because they're Muslim or appear to be Muslim. And more recently, we launched an immigrant rights program to make immigration services more accessible. So we help people get naturalized, get visas. We also do media relations, legislative advocacy. We do workshops and trainings like these, and youth empowerment programs. So we're really proud of the work that we do at CAIR, but we have to ask ourselves why we have to do this work at all. And that is because there are overarching structural aspects to the way American society is organized and operates that oppresses and exploits various groups and classes of people. And this manifests itself as racism, classism, patriarchy, homophobia, xenophobia, and other forms of bigotry. And at CAIR, we specifically track hate crimes and hate incidents that happen on the Muslim community. We're not a monolith, and we also have been noticing that hate crimes and hate incidents have been on the rise for our community. And this is mirrored in other communities as well. Obviously, we've seen the rise of hate crimes and hate incidents on the Asian community since COVID. Also recently, there has been a rise of hate crimes and hate incidents on the trans community because of legislation happening throughout the country. So this is a really intersectional problem that we all have, and it's deeply rooted in the structure of our society. And because of that, this training is not going to be an end-all, be-all solution. It's important that all of you are doing the work of longer-term struggles for justice. And this might be getting involved in direct action, lobbying your elected officials, or volunteering. Essentially, bystander intervention is an emergency response solution to hate crimes and hate incidents, but hate crimes and hate incidents are just a symptom of a larger problem in our society. So with that said, I want to get a sense from all of you. If you can, let me know in the chat once again, how many people have experienced, witnessed, or heard about a hate incident or a hate crime occurring in your community? You can put a +1, you can raise your hand, you can use the raise hand feature if it's there, if you've experienced, witnessed, or heard about a hate crime or hate incident. So normally when we do this training virtually and in person, we see that at least half of the group is experiencing or witnessing or hearing about hate crimes or hate incidents. And this is really telling because we do this training mostly in the Bay Area, although we've done them in and out of California. And a lot of times people think that in the Bay Area here, we don't have the same problems of hate crimes and hate incidents that might happen in other countries because we are insulated and we're in a liberal bubble. And that's just not the case. Hate crimes and hate incidents are happening here, and we're not protected from it. And that brings us to what we're here to do today, which is to help all of you practice putting help all of you have a plan for what to do when you witness a hate crime or hate incident happening, and to practice putting that plan into action in a variety of real life situations. So hopefully when you do, if you do witness a hate crime or hate incident, you will be ready to step in. So the first thing that we're going to do is go over some of the values that underline the training. And then we're going to walk through a series of steps that you can use to intervene in different scenarios. And we'll also talk about ways to secondarily intervene, like collect evidence or reach out to authority figures. And then lastly, we'll look at some real life situations and do some breakout rooms and discuss what this might look like in real life. So that's a lot to cover, but I want to first give a disclaimer that this training is not going to teach you how to deal with situations of immediate physical danger. Okay, so bystander intervention is a useful tool, but it's narrow in scope in that it's going to teach you how to deal with verbal harassment before it's escalated to physical violence. So if you're in a situation that is physically violent, our recommendation is to leave as quickly as possible with as many people as possible, but you can also take additional training around self-defense. Okay, so the values that underline this training are really helpful to review because the reality is that there's no one training that's going to be able to teach you how to deal with every possible scenario. And in the heat of the moment, it may be difficult or impossible for you to remember all of the details. So you can use your own critical thinking guided by these values, and that will help you stay on track with your intervention. So the values that underline this training are safety, support, and solidarity. And under our first safety, we believe that de-escalation is the safest way to respond. And that's because there are many unknown factors involved, and you never know what a stranger is capable of doing. So that is why de-escalation is your safest option. It's also important to be aware of how your intervention affects everyone's safety. So throughout this training, we're going to talk about various choices that you have and it's always important to think about what are the repercussions of all of those decisions. And lastly, under safety, practicing helps us get past our hesitations so we can act when necessary. So we won't be able to practice hands-on what this will look like in real life, but we're going to go through some scenarios and talk through it. And then I would suggest that you take those scenarios and practice them with the people that you live around so that you can build a little bit of muscle memory. The next value that underlines this training is support. So essentially, we are there to support what the targeted person wants. And this means that we're providing options for the targeted person and we're acting according to their wishes. We also ask the targeted person if they want our help. We ask how we can best help them, and we ask before we touch them, sorry. So consent is essential in all things, but especially when intervening to assist a targeted person. It's really important to make sure that they are comfortable with all of the decisions you're making. We also want to shift the focus of the situation to the targeted person by only interacting with them as much as possible and by ignoring the attacker. And we do this because we believe it's both more effective and because we believe that the targeted person deserves our attention more than the attacker. So the third value that underlines this training is solidarity. And we believe that nonviolence is the most courageous way to respond. It's easy to lash out and it's difficult to hold in your emotions and to act from a principled place. And you may not feel like you're ready to do that, but hopefully thinking through this training will help. Also, we are there in solidarity with the targeted person, not as their savior. So although it's our natural inclination to go to the source of the trouble, so in other words, to engage directly with an attacker and to try to make them stop, we recognize that this is not the most strategic way to respond, and it doesn't empower the targeted person. We also do not call the targeted person the victim because we want them to retain agency in the situation. And this is really important because at the core of this training is that we recognize that in a hate crime or hate incident, the targeted person loses a lot of power in their ability to control the outcomes of what happens. And we want to give some of that power back, and that is why we're using empowering language. Okay, I'm just going to pause here, see if there's any questions around the values that underline this training. Okay, looks like someone commented about some experiences with hate crimes, hate incidents. All right, so now we're going to go through this a series of steps that you can use to intervene. And we're going to use this cartoon that was popular for a while back, many years ago now, I think, on Facebook. And it's by a French cartoonist named Meryl, and it is a good visual demonstration of a lot of our key points. So before you even step in to a hate crime or a hate incident, the first thing you need to do is assess the situation. And it's important that you're ready to intervene. And this means being emotionally and mentally prepared to enter the situation. So if you check in with yourself and you feel like you're not going to be able to stay calm when you step in, that's a good time to reflect, maybe I'm not the best person to step in, and maybe someone else is better situated. It's also important to be aware of what's happening. So this just means seeing and hearing what's happening around you. So when you're in a public place, make sure to scan your scene, make sure you have one of your earbuds out so you can hear what's happening. So if a hate crime or hate incident does happen, you can bear witness to it. And once you see a situation developing, the next thing you're going to do is get others involved. This isn't in the cartoon, but it's a really important step. And we get others involved in order to beat the bystander effect. And the bystander effect is a psychological phenomenon where the more people that are present to witness any event, the less likely any of them will be to step in and help. And this is because we psychologically disperse our responsibility onto the people around us. But you can let someone know that they should be acting and remind them of that responsibility by just saying something like, hey, do you see what's happening over there? I think that we should do something. And saying something like that to someone near you is going to make them feel more likely to feel that, yeah, I do have some responsibility here. I should be acting. Once you've done that, you should give them directions for how to intervene. It's important to take the lead in this moment because it's unlikely that you're going to run into other bystanders who have training in de-escalation or bystander intervention. So this means that even if they want to help, they may not know the best way to do so. So one thing you can say is, hey, do you see what's happening over there? I think that we should do something. Can you take a video while I go talk to the targeted person? And that's one way to safely involve additional bystanders, but it's not your only option. So when we get to the scenarios, we'll talk about other ways that you can involve bystanders. Once you've gotten others involved, the next thing you're going to do is intervene calmly. And this is when you're going to introduce yourself to the targeted person. And you're going to quietly explain that you saw what was happening and you would like to provide support. So at this point, it's really important to be aware of your tone and your body language as you move closer to the targeted person, so they're not going to perceive you as a threat. And you should come in at an eye level with a calm tone and say something straightforward like, hey, my name's Courtney. I saw what was happening and I would like to provide support. Can I sit down next to you? So in just one or two sentences, I've said who I am, what my intention is, and I've asked for permission. So it's important that you use something straightforward like this because I've seen other trainings say that tell people to come up with like a ruse or a fake reason for why you're talking to them. Like, oh, don't I know you from the library? And in reality, if you don't know them from the library and they don't know you, that's probably just going to confuse them. And in the heat of the moment, they may not even be able to determine if you're there to help them or not. So it's really important that you let them know what their intention, what your intention is right away. It's important to ask for permission before doing anything. If the person says that they're fine and they don't want your support, you can move back, but monitor the situation. So if I say, hey, my name's Courtney, I saw what was happening and I would like to provide support. Can I sit down next to you? And they say, no, actually, I want to be left alone. You don't have to completely abandon the situation. Let's say we're on a bus here, which is happening in the cartoon. You might say, oh, okay, I'll be over there in that seat in case you change your mind. And then you can continue to monitor. And if the situation continues to escalate, you might want to check back in with them or take a video. Most likely, though, the person is going to welcome any company in that moment. And the next thing you're going to do is continue speaking with them. And you're going to ignore the attacker, even if they escalate verbally. And this is because we believe that ignoring the attacker has the greatest chance of de-escalating the situation. But I want to note that that is not guaranteed. So we all know that sometimes people come into a situation with an intent to do harm, and nothing you can do will dissuade them from that. But a lot of times people get in, they start verbally harassing someone because they saw someone they don't like and it wasn't planned. And when it's still at that verbal harassment level, we have a chance to de-escalate the situation through this tactic of ignoring. And that is because, like you see here in the cartoon, the attacker feels ignored. When you don't engage with the attacker and you focus all of your attention on the targeted person, we've seen this through practice, and you can feel it on your own as well if you practice playing the attacker, that the attacker feels isolated, they feel ignored, they feel irrelevant, they're not getting the attention that they were seeking, they're not having anyone engage with them, so there's really nothing to argue with. And oftentimes they even feel socially awkward. So they feel that it's obvious that it looks like they're talking to themselves, and it kind of ices them out. And on the flip side, the targeted person reports feeling not alone. They feel that if they needed something, someone was there to ask them, and they feel that they can ignore the attack. Like they hear it less. It's less loud. It's not as much on their mind because they have somewhere else to focus. But it's important to continue to evaluate the attacker and whether or not they're escalating or de-escalating. So when you're ignoring an attacker, it should de-escalate them, but it may not happen right away. It will take a little bit of time. And it's important to be able to see the attacker in your peripheral and also see your exit routes. Because if the attacker does continue to escalate or isn't de-escalating quickly enough, you might want to check in with the targeted person and see if they would like to leave that scene with you and go somewhere else. So in this situation, I would say, I don't think this situation is going to calm down. Would you be okay to get off this bus and get on another one or move to another seat? So I've given the targeted person a couple options so that they can have the choice and the power of that choice of determining what to do next. So signs to look for with escalation and de-escalation. So what you should be looking for is that if the attacker is de-escalating, they should be getting further away, getting softer, speaking less frequently. And if the attacker is escalating, they're going to get closer, they're going to get louder, they're going to speak more frequently. And if they ever touch your things or the targeted person's things or body or anything, that's an escalation. And it's a sign that that attacker doesn't see the barrier between their physical body and your physical body. And that is a sign that they're more likely to be dangerous. So you should leave. So at this point, hopefully the attacker has left the scene, or you and the targeted person have left the scene. What you're going to do next is continue to support the targeted person. So continue speaking with the targeted person even after the attacker leaves. You don't want to just say, okay, have a nice day. You want to, check in with them. This is a great time to let them know that they could report this incident. So CAIR, the ACLU, and Stop AAPI Hate all have report incident forms on their websites. You might also want to see if they want help finding additional mental health resources or counseling. And then really important, make sure that they get to their next destination safely. So you can offer to walk with them or get them transportation. Okay, are there any questions about the steps? And if you'd like, you can also feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question. Okay, so now we're going to talk about ways to. Oh,
sorry, I do have a question. It seems to me like these are for more overt situations and not just like kind of some passive, prejudice that gets expressed. And I don't know if you would have a different result in those types of experiences.
Yeah, it is different, and you're right, because the way that Bystander works is that it's effective for verbal harassment that's kind of ongoing. So someone standing around you, like let's say on the bus, on that situation, it's a hijabi, it's a woman wearing hijab being targeted. So that guy might just be standing there saying stuff over and over again, like, why are you wearing that? Take that off. Like, you don't belong here. Go back to your country. A bunch of stuff, right? It's going to happen over and over again. When someone says just a one-time microaggression or something like this, the way to deal with that is different. We actually have another training for microaggressions that we recently launched just this year because of that exact question that we got during bystander intervention. So if you're interested, I have another training, but essentially the way to deal with those is a little bit more complicated because you do have to evaluate the risk and power dynamics in the situation. So you might be in a workplace and the person who said it is an employer, the person who had it said to them is an employee, and maybe you're a peer. And so you have to think about what's your role there and how to be an ally, and it's more complicated and there's a lot more factors. So
did you see the other two questions? Sorry, in the chat.
What is my liability in support? I don't think that you would have a liability in being a supporting person by, supporting the targeted person. I don't think it raises liability. Do you have recommendations if you are also a member of the same targeted group? Yeah, so it is important to be aware of your identity and how it's going to impact the situation. And that could be on either direction with that. So if you look like the attacker does, then the targeted person might be more likely to see you as another attacker when you first go up to them. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't get involved. What it means is you just need to let them know what your intention is as quickly as possible, and make sure that you stay calm and have you that have that presence about you that shows that you're there to support them. And on the flip side, if you're a member of the targeted group or really any other minority group, the attacker might see you as another targeted person. But by stepping in to help a targeted person, you are accepting some of the risk, some of the risk of being a targeted person, because you're aligning yourself with the targeted person. But you taking on some of that risk is what decreases the risk to the targeted person. And I would say that it is less risky than directly engaging an attacker and going up to them and saying, you can't say that to them. They can wear whatever they want, whatever, So engaging directly in that way is going to be more risky than it will be to align yourself to the targeted person. And I would say that two marginalized people who are in solidarity with each other are safer than two marginalized people who are separated. Remarks at work. Yeah, those are a lot more complicated, and they require an analysis of a lot of factors of the power that you have, the power that the targeted person has, the power that the attacker has, how receptive the attacker is to being confronted or challenged. So we usually recommend a few different options, questioning, challenging, or confronting the person. So when you have a microaggression and it's someone that is the one doing it, you have some more leeway to actually engage with the attacker and to have a conversation about it. But like I said, doing so requires a careful analysis of the factors. Okay, so we're gonna move on to ways to secondarily intervene. So I want to talk about secondary intervention. And this is usually capturing video and audio evidence of the incident. And this is important for seeking legal remedies after the incident. And it's something that you can do if it's difficult or impossible for you to get to the targeted person, or it's something that another person can do while you speak with the targeted person. So this is not a Know Your Rights training, but I just want to quickly cover some of the legality around collecting evidence in public. So it's legal in all states to capture images of people in public. It's illegal in many states to capture audio of someone speaking in public without their express permission. So in California, I'll tell you what it is, and if you're not in California, then you have to look it up. But in California, it's illegal to record someone speaking in public if they have a reasonable expectation of privacy. So if you're sitting right next to someone and you're speaking at a reasonable volume, indoor voice, whatever, a reasonable person would see that as a private conversation, even in public, and you would not be able to record it. But if you're yelling at someone from across a bus and everyone can hear you, a reasonable person is not going to see that as a private conversation. So you, in most of the situations we're talking about, you would be able to record it. It's also important to be aware of how recording the situation might affect it, and namely affect the attacker, and whether or not it's going to escalate or de-escalate them. And it's important to monitor this, right? Going back to our value of safety and evaluating the repercussions of the decisions we make. So when you're taking a video, if you notice that it's escalating the attacker, you might want to hide your phone, drop your phone, put it in your pocket, go audio only, or even stop recording. What I'll say is it's really important to keep a big distance between the attacker, because if I'm this close, let's say the camera is the attacker, if I'm this close to the attacker, even if I'm ignoring them and I'm looking away, I'm sort of saying passive aggressively, I've caught you, I have you on camera, you should be ashamed. It's kind of still engaging with the attacker. And the attacker is going to be more likely to grab the phone, get aggressive, or get escalated about it. But if I'm, further away and I'm not making eye contact with the attacker and I'm taking a video, the attacker is more likely to ignore that. It's also helpful to know how to get to your video function quickly. So on an iPhone, you can swipe left to get to your video. And on an Android, it's usually like up or something, but just know how to do it on your own phone. And when you're taking video, you should hold your phone horizontally or sideways, because this is it's going to capture more of the scene, and it's also the orientation of media and television. And while you're taking the video, you should also focus most of your camera work on the attacker, not on the targeted person. And once you've done filming, what you should do is go up to the targeted person, let them know that you've taken this video, and see what they want to do with it, because it's more for their purposes if they want to seek legal remedies or give it to the media than it is for you. Okay, so now I'm going to go to a couple of questions that we often get asked. And one of them is, when you see a hate crime or hate incident like this, when it's still at the verbal harassment level, should you call the police? And in general, we advise people to not immediately call the police unless the situation has become physically violent. And this is because there are many people who see the presence of police as a risk of escalation in and of itself. And this may be because they're undocumented and they fear arrest, or it could be because their experience or their community's experience with the police has been disrespectful or dangerous. And this, we also recognize that there's a strong element of privilege on the basis of race, class, gender identity, immigration status, ability status, evolved in feeling free to call the police into a situation. We also logically know that if a situation did not previously involve a firearm, when you call the police in, you've entered a firearm into the situation, which decreases the chance of de-escalation. But as a bystander, you should remember that we are there to support what the targeted person wants. And this means that if you think that police intervention might be useful, you should check in with the targeted person and follow their lead. We also get the question of, what if the situation involves police misconduct? So this training is specifically around community on community violence. But since we often get this question, you should know that it's always legal to record the actions of the police as long as you're not interfering with those actions. And so this is not a know your rights training, but they cannot ask you to stop recording, delete your recording, or hand over your phone. But that doesn't mean they won't. So for situations like that, we recommend ACLU's mobile justice app. It allows you to take video straight from the app and it live streams to the ACLU. So if for whatever reason your phone is dropped, broken, stolen, smashed, I don't know, anything happens, the video footage is already there. This is specifically for police misconduct. though. Don't use it for community on community situations. Okay, so now I would like to talk through some real life scenarios. Are there any questions so far about the steps, the values, anything that we've learned so far? Okay, seeing none. In a minute, we're going to go into just a couple breakout rooms and have a couple minutes to discuss with each other at a few different scenarios. In this first scenario, we have a man harassing an Asian woman on public transportation. So in this scenario, we're on public transportation, just like in the cartoon. So a lot of the things are going to be the same. You're still going to assess, get others involved, intervene, continue to support the targeted person. Oh, I forgot, ignore the attacker, then continue supporting the targeted person. But I want you to also think about this additional problem. So we've seen in recent hate crimes and hate incidents that have happened on the Asian community is that sometimes they involve chemicals or bodily fluids. So the use of sprays, cleaners as a weapon, or someone coughing or spitting as a weapon. And so I want you to talk about that amongst your group, because it is a risk that has been ongoing for these kind of hate incidents. So talk about what are the challenges with that? How can you plan around it? What are your questions and concerns around this scenario? And then bring all of those back. Just discuss it. You don't need to like act it out or anything. Just discuss the scenario. Bring all of those questions, concerns, or comments back to this main group, and we'll discuss it. And then we'll do it a couple more times with other scenarios. I think everyone's coming back now. Welcome back. Okay, so what came up in this scenario? What questions, concerns, comments were mentioned in your discussions?
Sorry, I was concerned that by getting out the camera, rather than de-escalating it, it seems that that would encourage the escalation to go further if you brought a camera out. So I wanted to know your feeling on that.
Yeah, you're definitely right. It could definitely escalate the attacker, and it could make them angry and try to grab the phone. And so it's really best to, to hopefully try to get someone else who's further away from the attacker to take the video. So the person who's taking the video should probably not be close to the attacker, so that the attacker isn't really going to notice that person who's taking the video. But if it does still escalate the attacker or cause that, reaction, you do want to put your phone away, hide the phone, or do something like that, because you don't want to escalate the situation.
And we wanted you to address, if you would please, if we're dealing with an elderly person assisting another elderly person, what would be the best way to kind of support them, yet not get in the middle of that situation?
Okay, so the attacker is an elderly person too?
Not necessarily. It's just that the person who's being attacked is elderly, and maybe the woman who comes to assist them is also elderly. How do you deal with that situation in terms of safety?
Yeah, so if you're the bystander and you're elderly, or you have any other sort of limitations that might make it hard for you to get to the targeted person or might put you at a risk, it is something that you should evaluate for yourself before stepping in. And you might want to have someone else go with you if you're the elderly one, or if you're someone else and you see a target, I guess you're seeing another bystander stepping in, you can assist them. And sometimes on these small space situations, what might be best is, and it's sort of like bystander 2.0, or several levels down, is that if you're the one sort of delegating who's doing what, having someone who is physically bigger or stronger stand closest to the attacker can create sort of a barrier from the attacker than the targeted person, if that makes sense. And maybe if you have multiple bystanders, choosing who is going to be the one talking to the targeted person versus who might be standing as sort of a barrier.
Mm.
Any other thoughts about this? So what I do want to just say around the bodily fluids and the chemicals is that you should be aware that it might happen, and it is a possibility that anytime that a person who is Asian that gets targeted for a hate crime or hate incident, it might involve this. So you should prepare for that possibility. And if possible, first of all, know that that is physical violence and it's not just verbal harassment. So if someone's like spitting, coughing, or using sprays or something, that's physical violence. Treat that as physical violence. Try to leave as quickly as possible with the targeted person. But while you're on your way out, think in advance of how you might make sort of a shield for yourself. So maybe you carry around a jacket, a scarf, a backpack that you can use as a shield for your face and the targeted's face as you move away. Also, definitely document it, because there was recently, I've read a couple different reports of people who have gotten jail time because of coughing, using that as a weapon during COVID. So, planning ahead, it might be a scarf, like I can take this one off because I have something else underneath, but maybe it doesn't need to be that. You can use anything as sort of a shield, put it over your face, over the targeted person's face, and try to get out.
And when you say document it, you mean report it to the police?
I mean,
is that correct, or not for them to intervene at that exact moment, but after the fact?
Still, I would say that whether or not it gets reported to the police should be the targeted person's decision. They might still have a very good reason for not wanting that documented for the police. So check in with the targeted person first, but get the, any information and evidence that you can. So things that are helpful in hate crimes for evidence collecting are obviously like, the description of the person, their identity, videos if you can to identify the person, but really importantly, the statements that they made, because the only way to charge something as a hate crime, as in addition to whatever assault or battery, whatever charges there are, is to point it to the statements that were made at the time of the attack, and that they go toward bias, identity-based bias. So knowing exactly what the statements are really helpful. Just gathering that evidence in a way that's easy for the targeted person to decide what they can do with it.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
This is MJ. So I haven't followed the news on this. What kind of chemicals are people spraying on?
I've seen Febreze. Like
Febreze?
Like Febreze. I've seen it happen in a video when it was like Febreze, like an air freshener spray. Also the the air disinfectant one.
I see what you're saying.
Some people carry it around to like clean the air that they're in because of COVID, and they've used it in that moment.
Oh, okay. I was
Lysol.
afraid you were talking about acid.
Okay, yeah, not acid, but that's a reason to worry about that kind of stuff, because acid has been used in other attacks, and you never know what's inside of a bottle, right? You don't know how dangerous the chemical is that they have. Like maybe if it's just air freshener, it's not that bad, but you don't know until it's in the air. So
how about if you're trying to get people together, to recognize this incident, and you have a whistle, can you just blow that whistle so that people are kind of like snapped out of their, doldrum or something and can come help?
I'm not saying no. Maybe that would be helpful if someone blew a whistle. But as the lead bystander, the main goal I would say is to try to get someone to get to the targeted person, because our main goal here with bystander intervention is to center the targeted person and empower them so that they feel supported and that someone is there with them in solidarity. And a lot of times we focus on how to deal with the attacker. Like, how am I going to deal with the attacker? How am I going to make them stop? And in reality, like, dealing with the attacker is usually not strategic. And it also centers the attacker and their experience and their position. And that's not what we're trying to do. So if someone had a whistle and they're off to the side and it's going to distract everyone, fine, use it. I guess that's fine to do, but don't do that instead of speaking with the targeted person. Make that the priority, and don't blow the whistle when you're right next to the targeted person, because that's going to just startle them as well. Okay, I want to go into another scenario. So in this next scenario, we have a man harassing a Black person on the sidewalk from a car. So in this scenario, the attacker is driving and the targeted person is walking on the sidewalk. So in your groups, I want you to talk about, what does it mean now that we're in a different physical location? What does the addition of the car mean? What are the obstacles? What are the opportunities presented here? And what additional evidence do you need to get? And how are you going to approach the targeted person? You know, your approach might be different because it's on a sidewalk. So I want you all to talk in your group about this scenario and bring your questions, comments, and concerns back to the whole group. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Okay, it looks like I'm still sharing. So what questions, comments, or concerns came up in this scenario?
Well, actually, one that we were just mentioning is that the person who is like in the car, so the person targeted, like one of the ways to either possibly support them or not is like, maybe sometimes they need to make sure that they won't escalate the situation. Like, well, we can take off at any time at that point, or tell them to take off, but sometimes they may want to, you know, answer back, like, you know, the person's like kind of triggered, you know, they're triggered, and then they'll kind of start the back and forth, and that can escalate, whether it's just verbal or then it gets to worse. You know, because we figured that the car is a physical, you know, like you can hurt somebody with a car, or the person in the car can be, you know, can have other weapons other than their cars, right? Or get out of the car, which has happened. As some people are attacked, they get out of the car and they start to attack the person that they were targeting or something. Or the other person in the car that didn't want to move, or, you know, like those road rage type of thing. But, you know, like the person targeted should ideally try not to escalate either, which any situation actually, you know, whether it's in the public transit, whether walking or whatever, because then things can really get out of control.
Yeah, so this is always a possibility that the person who's being targeted may respond to the attacker. And hopefully this won't stop you from being able to be there and support and solidarity with the person being targeted. I do want to say, though, that if you're the person being targeted, it's up to you how you're going to respond to that. If you want to respond to the attacker, it may not be strategically the best thing to do, but it's within your right, because it's you that is being targeted. So it's you that has to deal with that. And you're the person that's dealing with that oppression. And I'm not going to tell people how they should respond to their own oppression. And I don't think that we should be in the habit of policing the way that people deal with these kind of oppressions. So what we can do is that sometimes when people do respond to their attacker, it does make the situation harder to get in and less safe to do so. So you might want to evaluate the situation and decide, maybe I can't get all the way into it, I can just take a video. But if it's still at a verbal level where the person, the targeted person, just engaging verbally, you might still be able to check in with them, see if, like, is there any way that I can support you? Would you like to leave? Do you want someone to walk with you this other way? So there are still options there. And right. Yeah, it may not be the most strategic thing, but is definitely a possibility.
And I was saying I would like try to get out of this, away from the situation as soon as possible, because I find like a lot of the car stuff can get physical quicker than anything. Not necessarily, but yes. I mean, you know.
Yeah. So this definitely raises the issue of cars. I wanted to name this, and this is, you know, directly on point. cars definitely can be used as weapons, and they have been used as weapons in recent history. Even in the Bay Area, they've been used as weapons in hate crimes and hate incidents. So you definitely need to make sure you monitor the car's location, try to keep a safe distance from the car, but also sometimes cars might present an opportunity. So the attacker might be driving on a one-way street going in one direction, and you might be able to ask the targeted person, do you want to walk the other way?
Right.
And that might be enough to dissuade the attacker. They may not continue to follow. However, if the attacker does continue to follow, continues to make turns, or makes a U-turn to continue following, that's a sign of escalation, and you want to ask the targeted person if they want to get off the street and into a well-lit area, or if the attacker gets out of the car. And it's something, and I think there was a private comment in the chat about whether or not, if the attacker has a gun or a knife, and you never know if an attacker has a gun or a knife on them. I mean, you can never totally know for sure, right? But it's even a higher risk, right, when someone's in a car, because they can be concealing a weapon or something. So you do definitely need to think about getting off the street and getting into a well-lit area. You should also try to get that additional evidence of the make and model of the car, license plate, description of the driver. And you want to think about how you approach the targeted person so that you're not like running up to them or grabbing them, bringing too many people up to the targeted person, because everyone is really, not really comfortable when people approach them on the street. So you want to make sure that you approach the targeted person in a really calm way. Make sure you make eye contact and show that you're there in solidarity, so that they are not going to just be like, whoa, who are you? Especially if it's at night, you want to be careful about the way that you approach targeted people on the street. So I think that we're out of time, and I just wanted to cover a couple other scenarios and just some key points here. So these are the other two scenarios that I wanted us to get to. And the first one is a person harassing a Latinx person speaking Spanish with a store clerk. And the second one is a transgender woman stopped while heading into the bathroom at a restaurant. With the Latinx person speaking Spanish, one tip that I want to have for you all is just don't let a language barrier be a barrier for you to intervene. So even if you don't speak the same language as the targeted person, you can still communicate a lot by your body language, by your your gestures, a hand over the heart. You can gesture to, point the person in a certain direction. And when you're in a line, don't try to cut in front of the line to squeeze past an attacker. What you want to do is just sort of leave your stuff, abandon the line, and go around to the front so you can get to the targeted person without having to squeeze past her or make it seem like you're cutting. And I wanted to mention that when it comes to supporting a targeted person, in this situation where we have a transgender woman stopped while heading into the bathroom, anytime that there's a bathroom involved, make sure that you check in with the targeted person very explicitly and make sure that they're comfortable with what you're doing, if they want you to come into the bathroom with them or not. Unlike every other scenario where I said that if the attacker does not de-escalate quickly enough, you want to leave the scene with the targeted person. Here I would say, if at all possible, make sure that the targeted person is able to use the restroom before you've asked them to leave. Because in this scenario, the targeted person is trying to exercise a basic bodily right that they should have a right to do. And the attacker is specifically asking them to not do that thing. And we don't want to just give in to attackers. We want to create safety, support, and solidarity to the targeted person. And in this scenario, that looks like, if at all possible, maintaining the targeted person's right to use the restroom. So that's a lot of information. I know that I probably just gave you a lot of things to think about. The biggest thing that I can tell you is that from now on, if you go through the world and you look around in public spaces and you think, what would I do if a hate crime happened here and it happened to this person and it was in this physical location? If you start thinking about those what if questions and all these different scenarios, and you just keep thinking about safety, support, and solidarity for the targeted person, you will be able to figure out the answer to a lot of these what if questions and alter the steps as you need to, but really centering the targeted person making sure that you're there to support them and that you're there to show solidarity and not just thinking about dealing with the situation. So are there any last minute questions that I can answer? I know that we're just a couple of minutes over. Are there any questions that I didn't get to?
Yeah, except I fucking listen. Sorry. Yeah, I was just, different situations, like regarding the car situation and a bunch of stuff. Like just being a woman, I just thought after a while, I'm like, well, I've witnessed a bunch of stuff because I'm a woman, like, notwithstanding anything else, like you can be, let's call it a non-minority situation because there's what, 50% of women or something, right? 50, let's say. So that happens all the time. So I'm like, still. So yes, then like a bunch of us have witnessed a bunch of stuff or suffered a bunch of stuff, or, from harassment or being targeted from, like whatever you want, from cars or anything and places and all that. And I'm not sure why, like, so I think, I don't know, that's kind of missing in the equation here to some extent.
Yeah, so this training is specifically around, hate crimes and hate incidents. There are different bystander intervention trainings for sexual assault situations that have slightly different tips to keep in mind.
Whether it's sexual or whatever, assault or harassment, or just sometimes just because you're a woman, it's not even sexual or whatever. So, so I think that needs to be incorporated because that's like this, as a woman, like I can kind of.
Can you give me an example of when it's not sexual assault?
Some of that, like as a resource for me to say, hey, wait a minute, yeah, that's happened before. What would I do, or how did I feel like, or how did I react that maybe I would do differently in a way, but also in those situations, because some of it is just like, you can't parse that out of there, totally out of the situation. Like it's not, you can't. Sometimes, whether somebody is a minority, religious or minority of color, their gender and so forth will also play a fact in there, whether they're man or woman or whatever, and they will affect the situation differently. But as a woman, I think most of us have had some situations like that, you know what I mean? So I think you can like divide, you can say how you want, but the, normal world doesn't work like that. You know what I mean? I've worked with people all my life and it just doesn't, human nature doesn't clive or split things in such ways. It's like you have to use some smarts or resources in a way. Yeah, you're presenting stuff like it, but I don't think you can just chop things off like that. That would totally be different if I'm, a woman, if the man, woman, and so forth in a situation for me. Anyway.
Yeah, so gender can be a cause for hate crimes and hate incidents. And, I agree. With the car situation, I personally have been stalked by cars. So, I've understood that the car situation from a gender perspective as well, and have, brought that into, the development of this curriculum and different advice that goes into it. And there are a lot of things that people experience because of their identity that are not just based on gender as well. So thank you all for attending and for being open to this for this content, and also participating in the scenarios, discussing it with each other. Really appreciate all of you attending. I'm going to put my contact information if you'd like to reach out with any additional questions or to find out more about our trainings that we offer. And feel free to reach out. Thank you.